Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 14th of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, the weather across the country is variable. So we've got everything from heavy rain to sunshine to mist and a little bit of traditional British summer clag. The good news is the sun's breaking through in a few places, including Brighton. So there we are. It's not all bad for midsummer. What else can you say, really? Welcome to UK. Overseas news, Mike.
Yeah, we're going to start with Iran because Iran and the other 6 leading world powers, allegedly the US, UK, France, China, Russia, plus Germany, have concluded the discussions that began in 2006, it seems, and it's being described as a conclusive deal on the Iranian nuclear industry, and that's according to an Iranian, of course. All the hard work has paid off, and we sealed the deal. God bless our people, this is an Iranian diplomat told Reuters. It was difficult work, apparently. The arguing continued through the night, just like Greece. At times it was heated with occasional shouting, but the result will be worth all that. So what is the result? Well, nobody really knows exactly yet, other than there's going to be some more significant inspections. It sort of reminds me of the run-up to the Iraq War with weapons inspections and so on, but we'll see how it turns out. Of course, this means that Iran probably will get their sanctions lifted. And of course, this is great news. Now, Putin says he's welcomed this, of course. He says that this will undoubtedly mean that NATO will remove the missile defense systems from Europe, because, of course, the excuse for having those in Europe in the first place was that it was to protect Europe against Iran. What do you think?
Pack of lies, probably.
I don't think NATO's going to budge on this one at all somehow. Lavrov said, we will probably remember that in April 2009 in Prague, US President Obama said that if the Iran nuclear program issue is sorted out, then the task of creating the European segment of the missile defense system will disappear. Well, that's what Obama said, but Obama has said lots of things. Now, as you can imagine, lots of people really happy about this, but of course, Mr. Netanyahu is not one of them, because he's not very impressed. This potentially removes the big bad bogeyman that's kept him in power in recent years. It's a bit ironic, really, because the Times of Israel reported last week that Netanyahu said that Iran wants to take over the world. I thought that was pretty ironic from a prime minister that's already taken over the world, really, hasn't he? I mean, how many political parties around the world have a Friends of Israel contingent, and how many world leaders are Friends of Israel? Can't really say any more than that. So,
well, I'm afraid we will, actually, because I was going to mention Oliver Letwin towards the end of the news programme today, who I believe is another very, very powerful British Conservative politician, but also friend of Israel. Interesting picture there, Mike. Was it my imagination, or was there a little Baroness Ashton hiding amongst the men?
Yeah, okay. So you've blown it for me, because this is, of course, is not a picture from today, because of copyright reasons we can't necessarily use pictures from today. So that is an historic photograph of the.
Right. So she seems to be in some sort of Chinese waitress outfit. I'm sorry to do this, and also, is she wearing jeans under that blue top?
Oh, I wouldn't have thought so.
So this was the lady who failed to investigate the snipers operating in Ukraine, of course, when trouble was brewing for President Putin. She clearly said in that telephone conversation that they needed to look into who the snipers were, but we've had nothing on that.
Yeah.
And also, she's the expert on nuclear weapons from somewhere. Okay, well done, Iran. If you've been having discussions with the Baroness, I'm sure you're on the right path to peace, or not.
Well, speaking of nuclear weapons, of course, Greece continues to be the one of the big talking points in the media, and they continue to push the notion that poor old Mr. Tsipras had no choice but to accept the deal that was done. Allegedly, according to the FT here, Mr. Tusk basically said to him, sorry, but there's no way you're leaving this room at the appropriate moment. Well, the new plan intends to, well, it has been discussed, but I haven't really noticed too many people mentioning this. The new plan, of course, adds to Greece's debt. It doesn't reduce Greece's debt, and certainly no signs of forgiveness going on here. So Greece's debt already 350 billion euros, as we know. That's 180% of Greece's GDP. So another 86 billion being added to that, bringing it up to 225%. But of course, the other point here is that what it effectively does is put control of Greece's banks into the hands of the European Central Bank. So the previous terms of the old deal meant that the Greek Parliament still had control over Greek banks. Those get put into the ECB's hands. Reuters had this to say: one of the preconditions imposed on Greece for a deal is that it signs into law European rules that would put the Eurozone authorities at the ECB and in Brussels, rather than Athens, in charge of identifying and closing or breaking up sick banks. This in turn would lead to a shake-up of the sector that would see some banks close, with losses pushed onto bondholders and possibly even large depositors. So we're talking about bail-in here. The bail-in now in the hands of the European authorities. One European official had told Reuters that the number of big banks in the country would be reduced from 4 to 2, possibly. Now, some of these big banks, in fact, all these big banks are owned by Greek oligarchs, so perhaps that's not such a bad thing. But nonetheless, in the meantime, we know, as we mentioned yesterday, Greece absolutely having their assets stripped from them.
Well, now under control of a criminal bank, European Central Bank.
Indeed. And just before we move on, we did make the point yesterday that, of course, Britain is also having its assets stripped from it without needing the crisis that Greece has. On Friday, I think it was, I asked the Treasury the press office to give me some details of what assets had actually been sold. Strangely enough, they didn't
decline to answer.
Well, they didn't specifically decline, but they just ignoring me. So that's now a freedom of information request. So as soon as we know, we shall let you know.
Can I just interject there? I also believe that Michael Portillo has suddenly put his head above the parapet and is saying that Britain could simply go the way that Greece is going.
I think Britain's already gone the way that Greece has gone.
Okay, so we can expect to be under the direct control of the European Central Bank in next to no time if David Cameron is allowed to continue his treasonous policies.
Now, of course, there's always stuff going on in the background when there are big headlines being made, and this is one of the things which is going on in the background. The latest TTIP stakeholder events. This is round 10 in Brussels, so today, Wednesday. What day is this? It's Tuesday the 14th. So that'll be tomorrow. There's going to be 2 stakeholder events. From 11:30 to 13:30, stakeholders wishing to make short presentations on a topic related to TTIP negotiations will have the opportunity to explain their views to the EU and US negotiators, as well as to other interested stakeholders. And that might cover issues related to manufacturing, technical barriers to trade, specific sectors, energy and raw materials, issues related to agriculture, including agricultural market access, and so on. No need to go any further than that. And then there's another stakeholder meeting in the afternoon. So TTIP goes on apace while everybody's looking in the other direction. And, one of the points about the Greek situation is that this is effectively the end of the Greek nation. And we're seeing the real sort of EU beast emerge. TTIP, of course, another sort of direction for this removal of the nation state, putting in a whole layer of law on top of national sovereignty. Right, let's change the subject because...
Well, are we, or is this actually part of the distraction technique?
No, and I think this is a much more serious situation, because reading through the coverage of this situation in all the mainstream newspapers, I have to say that it reminds me very much of the first days of the foot and mouth situation. Now, we have been saying for quite a long time that what's been going on in this country, aside from the asset stripping, the deliberate sale of stuff, has been the attack on our agricultural industry. And foot and mouth, BSE, 2 examples of that. Here we've got another, I think, another example of it, of course, was the eggs situation, which really damaged the egg production that we have in this country. This is just going for free-range chickens now. So all free-range chickens have to be kept indoors at the moment, I believe. 170,000 chickens culled as bird flu found at farm, and this is apparently a bird flu which can be transmitted to humans, although it is not the more serious H5N1 strain. It is H7N7, and they've started killing the animals already. A humane cull, of course, just like foot and mouth, no doubt.
Well, hopefully we will be able to show more on foot and mouth in due course.
Yes, just one or two little tweaks to do, and we'll get that documentary out at last.
Which is pretty shocking. And as you say, it seems that this one is heading exactly the same way.
Yeah.
The way it's announced, the cull. If this spreads, then we simply got a replay of how foot and mouth was initially kicked off by the British government.
Indeed.
Well, if we need to distract the public, one of the things we need to distract the British public away from is the subject of child abuse. And it can be no surprise that within a few days of Melanie Shaw coming up very strongly on the establishment radar with her exposure of the vicious child abuse that's been going on in Beechwood Home in Nottingham, and of course other children's home. We've now got the first sign of the Nottingham child abuse cover-up. And the background to this is that there have been some very productive talks over the last few months with Mickey Summers Group in particular, where the aim was to get both Nottingham City Council and County Council participating with child abuse survivors, so that the survivors were an integral part of the investigation. However, what has now taken place is that the councils have backed down, and apparently it's claimed at the moment that they decided that they're not going to work with the child abuse survivors. They're going to do an internal review, as it says here, without the full involvement of those people who've been abused. David Hollis, who's a man who's been giving great support to the child abuse survivors, said that it would give survivors their voice if they could participate. It would give them what we're looking for. It will begin to establish what the facts are. Now,
can I ask a question?
Please do, yes.
I mean, is it not essential to have witnesses when you're conducting some kind of inquiry?
Not if the objective is cover-up, Mike. If it's a cover-up, and we're going to be moving on pretty quickly to Ms. Goddard, what we're seeing in Nottingham is the same pattern that we see across the country, that the inquiry is done internally. You then only talk in terms of compensation for the victims. You keep all mention of any criminal investigation out of it. And at the moment in Nottingham in particular, there's a big, I call it a game, but of course it's a very serious game. So for example, the Nottingham City Council, County Council inquiry was put on hold while Nottinghamshire Police supposedly conducted Operation Daybreak. Now we seem to have the reverse happening. Well, the police are doing nothing. Now we're going to put it to an internal inquiry, excluding, as you say, the people who are the real witnesses to the abuse going on. Do we make it up? No, and we don't have to. But of course, the BBC, we can expect to be doing everything possible. And I noticed this a few days ago, encourage people to have a look. This is the BBC ramping up child abuse reframing. That's what we're calling it, to help Goddard's most transparent cover-up in British political history. So here's the BBC claiming that it's publishing the key investigations. And if you have a look to see what they've got, well, they simply focus on 2 or 3 of the ones that have had very high profile in the press and media, but of course absolutely minimal productive outcome by the police. So we've got Dolphin Square mentioned here, we've got Elm Guest House, we've got Grafton Close Children's Home, we've got the investigation into the paedophile information exchange, and remember that senior British politicians were themselves linked to the paedophile information exchange, and of course we got Cyril Smith. So according to the BBC, this is the main part of it. They do list some other inquiries. So we've got Operation Palliel in North Wales. But this may be a little bit small. We did a little bit of research on this, and virtually every police force across the country has got at least one investigation, which at the moment is producing, well, surprisingly,
Nothing.
results. No results whatsoever. And where does the British government now want to go? Well, the biggest insult I think we've seen to the British public in some time is that there is nobody honest enough or trustworthy enough to run a child abuse investigation in Britain. So we've had to drag in a judge from New Zealand, Ms. Goddard. This is the remarkable woman who said, well, I don't even know what the establishment is, so I can't be part of it. And yet a few years previously, she'd been dating some of the top establishment people in this country. Little bit of memory problem, selective memory problem.
Maybe she's got the same problem that Lord Janner has.
She might have Lord Janner's problem. Well, here she is, remarkable photograph by the Daily Mail. And what are they and many other people now starting to point out? That this woman is going to be earning £360,000 a year, plus £130,000 expenses and 10 return flights for her and her family to New Zealand. This is the same government that hasn't got money to put on policing to get into child abuse, but we can pay out vast sums to this unknown New Zealand judge. So we say welcome to the most expensive and most transparent cover-up of child abuse in British political history. She's going to pick up a cool 2.5 million. Just look at those callous, empty eyes. But no doubt she'll be enjoying the 2.5 million. And then 17.9 million already made available just for 2015-16 alone. And 41% of that, according to the Mail, is going to be on for the pay of barristers and researchers. This is outrageous, and it's going to be very interesting to see whether the mainstream press start to pull this woman apart, as they did with the previous incumbent. So what's she got to say for herself? Well, she says child abuse cannot be calculated in monetary terms. Now, many people will think this is in fact right. They think that what she's saying is that you can't make up for that abuse in monetary terms. But UK Columns says that is absolutely not what this woman is talking about. What she's really talking about is the fact that the scale of UK child abuse compensation would break the insurers because they could not cover the public indemnity claims for governments and local authorities alone. And we're going to suggest that it's Ms. Goddard's job to make sure that these powerful City of London companies are protected. That's our opinion. And of course, what we've seen now with the Nottingham change of face is they are desperate to close down the real truth about child abuse in Nottingham because it's already been intimated in public sources that Nottingham City Council has been threatened by their insurers. Get a lid on it, otherwise you're not going to carry on operating as a council. This is big money, Mike, dirty business covering up child abuse. So who would you want to be sitting alongside Ms. Goddard? Well, let's just have a look at a couple of the figures. This man, very interesting, Professor Malcolm Evans. He's a big wheel at a university. Well, why would you want him sitting on this sort of investigation? Just have a look at his CV, and we say go and see it for yourself at source. He's a big man on law, so he's actually worked with the UN, the Organisation for Security and Communication in Europe. He's worked with the Foreign Secretary. He's just an academic. What experience has this man got of child abuse? From his CV, I can't see any substance, but if you worked for the Foreign Secretary, presumably you're pretty well known in government. And how about this lady, Drew Shapling? Well, what's her claim to fame? The biggest one is that she's been working as an inspector with Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. If you have a look at their website, they boast about all their good work in making sure the police do their jobs.
Sorry? Their good work making sure the police do their jobs.
Yes. So
but the police haven't been doing their jobs.
Well, I'm coming on to that, Mike.
Okay, sorry.
So let's have a look at how independent that Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary is. We just found this morning, which we thought would do the job. So here we've got a memorandum of understanding between the Inspectorate of Prisons, the Inspectorate of Constabulary, and the Independent Police Complaints Commission. But don't worry, they're in a combined memorandum of understanding. They're working together, they're collaborating together, but of course they're independent. So just the sort of people you need to bring on Ms. Goddard's.
Reminds you of the deal between CAFCAS and the
Family Law Division. Yep.
Mm.
So there we are. So let's come back to this lady. Do have a look at her biography, because she's very big on her good work with the Independent Inspectorate of Constabulary. Mike's already got it in, because we want to ask a question. Wasn't it Miss Shapling's job as an Inspector of Constabulary to ensure that the police did their job in investigating and stopping child abuse? One would have thought so. But let's have a look at how her team deal with the police. Well, here they are blaming the police over failures to investigate children. So we just bring her in because it was her job in the first place to make sure the police were doing their job. But just the woman to get on board Goddard's investigation panel. Here's the Guardian pointing out similar sort of information. No officers to be charged over Rochdale. Well, here she is. The woman for years should been had her finger on the pulse with the police, not doing her job, police not doing their job, just the woman to get on Goddard's board. And Sky News here, same thing, police fail most child abuse victims. Let's bring in one of the key people from Goddard's team. You don't need to make it up. It's so obvious. It's so arrogant. So let's have a look at this woman. Be careful of those eyes. We're saying the empty promises of a massive and highly orchestrated British state cover-up of child abuse. Why would they want to do that? There is only one answer: to protect Westminster abusers. So these are some of the empty promises that she's made. She says that individuals and institutions will face scrutiny no matter how apparently powerful. Notice she says face scrutiny. She's not talking about a full criminal investigation by the police. She goes on to say the inquiry will use sweeping powers to publicly identify those who have avoided justice for vile crimes. So she doesn't mention the police, she doesn't mention criminal trials. We're just going to bring these to the attention of the public. And this one is particularly good. The inquiry would not hesitate to uncover the scale of abuse that had left permanent scars on victims and society. Well, that's not true, because the inquiry is already a cover-up using establishment place people, as we've shown, and Goddard is herself one of those. And she says they're not going to get bogged down with delays, bedeviling probes such as the Chilcot inquiry. Well, that's a blatant lie, because this inquiry itself is going to run to 2020, and they can then presumably spend 2 years chewing the fat over the report. It's a cover-up. And finally, she says we must travel from the corridors of power in Westminster to children's home in the poorest parts of the country, to hospitals, GP surgery, schools, churches and charities, apart from Hampstead, that is, of course. And she's advocating travel, not criminal investigations and trials. So this is despicable. Who is this woman? Why was she brought in? I think we're seeing only too clearly.
How are they going to travel to children's homes when those are being sold and or knocked down in the meantime?
Well, you need to get them knocked down, Mike, and get the houses built pretty quickly so that forensic evidence has been completely whitewashed. I'm told that Ms. Goddard intends to establish bases in 4 key cities in UK, and apparently one of her key bases will be Nottingham. So well done, Ms Goddard. You'll be arriving in Nottingham in time to, perhaps she could open the new houses built on the old Beechwood child abuse home site. Yep, that would be good. Over to you and the police, I think.
Well, I'm not going to say anything about this article other than go and read it. Ian Puddock tweeted it out this morning as being an excellent article. I absolutely trust him. And I'm really only using it as an advertisement for the fact that Ian will be with us on this programme on Thursday, and just wanted to let everybody know that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, there's the bag of swag, which is really public assets in UK. Is that a picture of Cameron masquerading as a policeman?
I suspect in reality that is child abuse evidence just about to be dumped in some waste baskets in various public parks.
Well, the best man to talk to is Oliver Letwin.
Yeah.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, Express here reporting covering a report. This report is from the Royal United Services Institute, which they call a high-profile security think tank. Well, indeed it is. It's so high-profile that they give awards out to the likes of to Bilderbergers and so on. The name escapes me at the moment. I do apologise. So anyway, they're really expressing concern that internet companies are deleting data to avoid government snooping. They're increasingly concerned by the fact that many of the subjects of interest, including those in the highest priority investigations, are able to use means of communication to which the investigators no longer have access, and they're really concerned about this is another attack on encryption techniques and so on. And they're saying that disclosures by Edward Snowden have prompted the commissioning of this report. And they're saying that, well, they really need to get some kind of legislation in place because otherwise they're just not going to be able to investigate people of interest.
Yeah, it's interesting, of course, when the British government deletes data from its own website to hide from the public what it's actually been doing, that's not a problem. But when other people do it, then the government's getting pretty excited.
Well, the key thing is they're particularly concerned about encryption, and so under those circumstances we need to use more.
Indeed. More encryption, get talking to more people, more emails, more tweets, more of everything electronic, because of course if we had 40 million adults pushing out at least 100 pieces of electronic information per day, we might get value for our money from GCHQ, or possibly the computers would start steaming. Well, how do we really cover up what's happening in government? We need a cover-up agent, and credit where it's due, a remarkable piece of investigative journalism by the BBC.
No.
I'm afraid I've said it.
Okay.
I'm afraid I've said it. But will the man still be in his job much longer? I don't know. We'll watch with interest. Encourage you to have a look at this particular story. The headline, the most powerful person you've never heard of. And it's a lady called Sue Gray, who's the Director General of Propriety and Ethics Team. Now, this unknown woman, or largely unknown woman, the BBC is pointing out is unbelievably powerful within the Cabinet Office. And if we have a look at some of the things they've said, well, she works in the Cabinet Office, where she's the asking for trouble job title of Director General Propriety and Ethics Team. Her job is to adjudicate on whether rules have been broken by officials, ministers and special advisors. In practice, she's also a fixer for Sir Jeremy Haywood, head of the Civil Service. So this woman is the fixer. She's the one who decides whether somebody's going to be put under pressure because she decides they've broken the rules. And the point the BBC is quite rightly making is this is all done in a highly secretive manner. So Stephen Parkinson, a special advisor at the Home Office, wrote to her to ask about confirmation of the rules. Well, she doesn't like saying what the rules are, and replying would reveal that either she had worryingly failed to enforce the code against other advisors, or she had, in secret, abolished the code. Neither would be helpful to ministers. So she didn't answer on 7 occasions. So a woman buried at the heart of the Cabinet Office simply hides, covers up, deceives the public and deceives the press and deceives other government special advisors. And then the BBC goes on to say, even when a document trail exists, Ms Gray is enthusiastic about keeping it secret. We know she advised special advisors on how to destroy email by double deletion to thwart freedom of information requests. She did not advise them on the requirements of the code on public record keeping. We also know via the Freedom of Information Act that she kept no log of why, how or when she destroys documents, contrary to that guidance. So the BBC quite clearly saying this woman is breaking the law, and yet this immensely powerful woman is buried at the heart of government in the Cabinet Office.
So that makes her a colleague of Francis Maude?
I think this is absolutely the case. And
so Francis Maude leads the transparency drive?
Yeah, Francis Maude, head of transparency for David Cameron's opaque Conservative government. But we've got this mysterious woman that until fairly recently nobody really knew she existed or what she did. Now we're starting to see somebody unelected, immense power. Now we've got another clue for what's going on here, because a very good man called John Walker had been asking about common purpose connections with the government's information organisation. So he'd sent in a request to the Cabinet Office, and in no time at all he got a pretty hard go away. So this is back in October 2010. This is the response. I'm sorry the text is a little bit small, but the key bit here is that the Cabinet Office says, I've determined that in all circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exclusion outweighs the public interest in confirming or denying that the file contains information protected by these exemptions. What was Mr. Walker asking? He was simply asking how many people on that panel have been trained by Common Purpose. Now, why do we bring this into the frame? Well, let's have a look at who is really controlling government. Of course, it was the UK column that exposed that it was Julia Middleton, the chief executive of Common Purpose, was working behind closed doors with Francis Maude, and a deal was being struck that Common Purpose would train the top 200 civil servants. The same Common Purpose that, of course, was collecting the data of members of the public inquiring about public money being spent on Common Purpose, and in collecting that data, Common Purpose were breaking the law and were subsequently told that was the case by the Information Commissioner. So Common Purpose buried into the Cabinet Office alongside Francis Maude. We've now got Sue Gray, here she is, and it seems to me that she would have been the woman that ensured the Cabinet Office response to a freedom of information about Common Purpose was close it down. She is the fixer for this man, Sir Jeremy Haywood. This is where the real power is in government at the moment, nothing to do with elected MPs. This is political soft Marxism. And we've got to remember this man, Oliver Letwin. Now, senior military sources have been telling the UK column for some time that it is Francis Maude and Oliver Letwin are the two people that are controlling the Cabinet Office with a rod of iron. So Oliver Letwin, the man who simply dumped official secrets in the waste bin of a park in London, he doesn't really care about Britain, throw away confidential secret documents, whatever they were. This is the man who is controlling all of policy through the Conservative government. Presumably it would appear with this lady, Sue Gray. I think we've got to say, BBC, are you waking up? Or is this another article to distract from Jimmy Savile? Sorry to be a bit unkind. Well, let's end on Oliver Letwin. Thank you very much for the person in London who sent us this little bit from his Twitter. He's got a nice picture of himself speaking at his public meeting in Chickerell in West Dorset. But we happen to notice this, which is the national flag. And we just wondered, why would Oliver Letwin need to have a national flag when he's doing a little local talk? Is it to pretend that he actually values Britain and British values? Why as an ex-NM Rothschild banker would he need to prove that he's British?
Well, I don't think he does. And in fact, he was sitting in front of the House of Lords Constitutional Committee, one of the constitutional committees, a couple of days ago, discussing the rule of law, and he didn't seem to have much regard for it. So probably not a surprise.
No. Well, anybody in the London, or at the London end, Westminster end, who's got information on this cabal running the Cabinet Office, we of course would like to take that information. And I'll say thank you very much to all the sources that have been talking to us over the last few weeks. This is where the real danger is at the heart of government, the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Office, of course, also issues out all of the awards and gongs and medals, Jimmy Savile, for example. And the BBC article mentioned that Ms. Gray would probably also have an input into which people won awards. So maybe she knows quite a lot about a lot of people.
So tell me, why do you think, what would the Foreign and Commonwealth Office be interested in climate change for?
Well, could it help their business overseas? We're pumping money into companies overseas, and
well, I don't know is the answer. Maybe somebody can answer us on a postcard, please. But this report from the University of Cambridge, Climate Change, a Risk Assessment, commissioned by the Foreign Office, not really clear why that is. So they're basically saying that if population isn't slowed, and if we don't reduce our carbon use and greenhouse emissions, it's going to be fatal for people lying down in the shade in some of the hotter parts of the planet. Yep. They say that, well, here's the one quote that I really want to highlight here. What in the context of changing climate we might do to each other is deeply uncertain, but we might start from the understanding that climate has hardly changed at all in the first 10,000 years of human civilization, and that even the 0.8 degrees of climate change we have seen so far is now causing us significant problems. So I think that statement on its own is enough to discredit this entire report. So let's look at that again. They say we can start from the understanding that the climate hardly changed at all in the first 10,000 years of human civilization. Well, let's just look at the graph, because you can see quite clearly that climate didn't change at all over that 10,000 years.
It's a straight line, clearly.
It is clearly a straight line. There's no red or blue on that graph at all.
Yeah.
They went on to say that the climate change causes enormous risks to national and international security. This is probably why the Foreign Office is actually interested in this. They say extreme water stress and competition for productive land could both become sources of conflict. Migration from some regions may become more a necessity than a choice and could take place on an historically unprecedented scale. The capacity of the international community for humanitarian assistance, already at full stretch, could easily be overwhelmed. The risks of state failure could rise significantly, affected in many countries simultaneously, and even threatening those that are currently considered developed and stable. Now, of course, this whole report is based on the premise that the climate hasn't changed at all in the first 10,000 years of human history up until the Industrial Revolution. So I don't really have any more to say about that other than, well, in fact, I don't really have anything more to say about that.
Well, Mike, I have one question for you. But did that government report mention the squirrels, the ground squirrels and the beavers at all?
I didn't see any mention of those, no.
Probably we should write them a letter to say that unfortunately you've neglected to put in the piece that according to the Daily Telegraph, remember it was beavers and ground squirrels that were caught. They were scratching the surface of the tundra. This was releasing carbon dioxide, and of course that was increasing global temperatures. We're clearly seeing that today in Plymouth. Unbearably hot sunshine here, not. So I'm confused. If anybody out there can explain this global warming scam to me, please do. But I think it's pretty mean to be blaming the poor little beavers and ground squirrels for the problems of the Conservative government. Meanwhile, anybody who's got any information on Baroness Ashton and her promise to look into who those snipers were helping to kill innocent men, women and children and wind up the violence in Ukraine, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us, and do have a look at the information coming out around child abuse. If you want to solve the problems in this country, banking is part of it. And the Bradbury Pound is a key solution for fraud and corruption in the international banking cartels. If we want to deal with our own government, let's get the lid off child abuse and the fact the British government is covering up for the abuse of children by its own kind. Politicians, senior members of the British establishment being protected. For what reason? We'll leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining us. Back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.